On today's episode, Dr. Liz and I welcome Dr. Ryan Seedall to the show. Ryan shares common relationship conflict patterns and the role of anger in relationships, and how attachment can play a major role in relationship dynamics. Drawing on his 20 plus years of experience as a therapist, he also provides some practical pointers to help strengthen your marriage connection. Dr. Ryan Seedall was born and raised on a farm in Rupert, Idaho. He received his PhD from Michigan State University in 2011 and joined the MFT program at Utah State University in 2012. He's a licensed marriage and family therapist and has been a practicing therapist for over 20 years. Much of his research has sought to understand interactional processes, including how people interact and how relationships change. With particular interest in attachment theory and its processes, he has conducted process-related research and scholarly work in the areas of couple conflict, couple support, intervention, grief, and power. Clinically, he loves working with individuals, couples, and families about a variety of issues including trauma, infidelity, depression, anxiety, couple conflict, and more. He and his wife, Ruth, live in Hyde Park, Utah, and have 4 children. We hope you enjoy the show. Hey there, friends. Welcome to another episode of the Stronger Marriage Connection podcast. I'm Dr. Dave, here with Utah State University Extension, along with Dr. Liz Hale, our licensed clinical psychologist. We're aiming to bring you the very best that we have in valid relationship research and resources, along with a few tips and tools to help you create the marriage of your dreams. All right, Liz, our guest today is a friend and colleague who I've worked with for the past 9 years here at Utah State University. He's a professor and director of the Marriage and Family Therapy program here at USU, helping countless students, couples, and individuals learn principles and practices to help them in their marriage journey. Plus, he's an all-around great guy, not to mention a wonderful husband and father. Welcome to the show, Dr. Ryan Seedall.
Thank you for having me.
I'm so jealous. You two get to go to lunch, and I don't.
Yeah,
God.
That's right.
Cool.
Yeah, he's right here on campus. Yeah, a good friend that does great work. Ryan, you've been a therapist for more than 20 years now, and have worked with and helped students work with hundreds, even thousands, I'm guessing, with all the students who've then gone on to help people over the years. And they come with all kinds of struggles and challenges. And we typically end all of our podcasts by asking guests what they believe that the key to a stronger marriage connection is. But I'd like to actually start by asking right up front, in your experience, what are some of the most important things that contribute to healthy marriages? In other words, Ryan, are there some common characteristics of couples that you're like, yes, these couples, they have it? And what is that it?
Yeah, it's an interesting question because there's no one size fits all. I think over the years, it's been really interesting for me to recognize that a lot of couples can have a really solid, good relationship, and they can look pretty different. Of course, there are some commonalities I think that are important. And, one of the things that I've seen more often than not is couples who come into therapy, they have certain things they want to work on, certain things that maybe are not quite, they don't feel right. It just doesn't seem to be where they want things to be. Maybe they're working through something that's happened in the past or something like that. And so certainly in my work with them, we want to address those issues. We want to help them become better at conflict or heal from, something in the past that's happened between them or whatever. But, I think a lot of times what I've seen that is really, really important that not all couples think of is just the building the positives. I realized early on in my training that a good relationship is not just the absence of negative. Have to have really positive things, and it's easy to get away from that. I think most couples, one of the things I always ask when I'm, at the beginning of the first session is just how they met. I want to understand their courtship. I want to understand how they connected. And there's usually some really cool things that they've done, and it's easy for couples to get away from that. And so a huge piece that I feel is, in addition to healing from the hurts, is being able to get back to what built their relationship in the first place. How do they give and receive love? What really works, and helping couples get to that place, I guess.
Mm-hmm. So really, it sounds like reminding them, finding that glory in the marital story, Gottman will say, because they can almost be blinded, it seems like, by the struggles of the current challenges right now, that they can easily forget what it was, right? That drew each other together in those early years, and the dating and the funny things and the little quirks. But it can easily be overshadowed by the current struggles, it sounds like.
And sometimes it's remembering those things and just doing them. And then sometimes, couples get to a point where they're like, we can't go back to that, but we can revise it in a way that our relationship can still be strong, can still have those positives.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And moving forward. Yeah. Sometimes I'll talk to couples about marriage 2.0. And one of my couples actually said, marriage 2.0, we're like on marriage 20.0. I think, that you're right. We can't necessarily bring back the past. Sometimes that is gone, and think life's so different. But to renew some of those things, or put them in, up to today's space and time. I love that. And of course, differences and conflict is a critical part of what you do also, Ryan. What are some of the key points our listeners need to understand about conflict in relationships?
Well, there's some great information out there related to how do we bring up difficult things. John Gottman has amazing things about a soft startup, and he talks about the 4 horsemen: criticism, contempt, stonewalling, those sorts of things that are disruptive to relationships. And so I think it's a big thing to understand, how do we avoid those things, and how do we do something that's productive. I think for me, the thing that I found is that I really recommend that couples find a way to recover from couple conflict. I think sometimes we focus all of our energy on how can we conflict appropriately. And I think that's really good. But I think couples need to find a way to come back from it. How do they turn off the conflict? How do they turn on positive things in their relationships? And, there's been a lot done that really has highlighted that recovery from conflict, being able to kind of come back from it, is so crucial. And I've seen couples where, unfortunately, it basically is conflict, and then it blows up, and then there's like a period of time where they don't talk, and then basically eventually that thaws, and then they can talk again, but they don't ever really talk about the issue, and that's just an easy cycle. And so that recovery, that repair, I guess is another word, is how can we actually repair when things happen in our relationships. So I guess that's one big thing I would highlight, be above and beyond some of those things that maybe other people who have been on your podcast have mentioned.
It's never going to be perfect, is it, Dave and Ryan? No. Not in this life, right? Not as mere mortals, but so the reparative attempt, that's crucial. Thank you for that, Ryan.
Yeah, Ryan, you've not only seen a common pattern called the demand withdraw pattern in couples, but you've actually researched a bit as well. Can you walk us through the demand withdraw pattern that so many couples find themselves in, and often don't even realize it?
Yeah. Well, I think as I think about my even career as a therapist, one of the things that I've realized that I really enjoy doing is looking at patterns and cycles in relationships, some of which get passed down through the generations, honestly. And demand withdraw is a pattern in couples. Sometimes people call it blame withdraw or pursue withdraw. There's different names for it, but in essence, I should say there are positive patterns too that we enact in our relationships, and they get handed down too. But it's one that's maybe a little bit more destructive. And the more destructive ones, one of the big challenges is that my behavior actually brings out the behavior in my partner that I'm most struggling with, and vice versa. So pursue, withdraw is like in moments of distress and kind of where we're aroused and struggling a little bit. Then one person seeks to engage the relationship. We're going to fix this by engaging in the relationship. That's the pursuer. And then the other person seeks to withdraw from the relationship, needs more emotional space. And it might be for really good reasons. Maybe, I probably trend a little more pursuing. My wife trends a little bit more withdrawing. One of the things she's told me is, you don't want to hear what I have to say. It might not have a good enough filter for me. And so this pursue, withdraw. So I pursue, I say, we got to talk about this. This is an issue. She withdraws. She feels kind of like attacked or, cornered. And then she decides, I'm going to withdraw. And the more she withdraws, the more I'm like, no, we got to talk about this. I pursue it. And the more I pursue it, the more she withdraws. And then, nothing really ends up happening. Sometimes it just blows up and then we separate anyway, or eventually, usually that happens. Either it escalates so badly, that it's not productive, or, it escalates and then we have to have space from each other. So,
okay. Is there I'm curious, a gendered, pattern as far as research, what it suggests, and how do couples, I don't know, how do you help them
get out of that,
see that, and then kind of work through it?
Yeah. Some of our gender expectations would be that maybe men withdraw more and women pursue more. My research didn't necessarily show that directly. There are some evidences. In fact, one of the things that it depends even more than gender is who the issue is most important to. So whether you're a man or a woman, if the issue is important to you, you're likely going to exhibit more demand behaviors. One of the things that my research did show, and this makes total sense, is just that the more I pursue, the more my partner withdraws, or the more my partner withdraws, the more I pursue or demand. And so there is this systemic piece of something we're feeding off of each other. In terms of how you handle it, a lot of times I help couples recognize that we are wired a little bit differently. I think the big fear for someone who's a pursuer is that they're never going to be able to talk about it. And in all honesty, sometimes that bears out. The withdrawer withdraws and then they never come back to it and they never end up really doing anything. And then what happens is eventually that plays out again, whether it's the same scenario or a slightly different scenario. I think the withdrawer really needs that space, and maybe their big fear is, saying something that they're going to regret or that they don't want to, or engage in a way that's not good. And so I think a lot of times when I've seen couples handle this more healthily or more in a better way, I think one of the big things is that they're both very clear about what they want, and they're also clear about what's going on for them. So, sometimes it is as simple as calling a negotiated timeout. Not a timeout that says we're done. We'll come back sometime in the future, but hey, I need 15 minutes. I really do want to talk about this, but I need 15 minutes. And then I go, rather than gathering the artillery and getting ready for war, I'm trying to just get myself in a place where we can both engage in a good way. And then if 15 minutes isn't quite long enough, I go to my partner. I say, hey, is there a way that we can do another 15 minutes? Again, we really want to do this. Or maybe we say tonight at 7:30, let's talk about this. But it's trying to give the withdrawer a little bit of space that they need to process things. And the pursuer needs to get their ultimate goal of being able to talk about things. And so it's navigating that a little bit. And the couples who can do it, they're just clear with what the overall goal is. And then they're also, negotiate. And probably you negotiate the timeout stuff when you're not escalated. You do that ahead of time, and you just, lay things out so that when or if the time comes that you start to escalate, you both know what the plan is.
Mm-hmm. I imagine, right, with some of this, it depends on, some of the communication saying, hey, I would love to chat about this, but I feel attacked. And I know, your tone goes up, and I feel attacked. So is there some type of this, both of us, okay, recognizing, I see the pattern and I see my role in this. I've got to learn to kind of keep my tone, go slow and low instead of this, loud and attacking. So the other person's literally kind of sometimes afraid, being like, hey, we've done this before and it doesn't end well. I'm not going, I refuse to, but then the, withdraw, I refuse to talk to you unless you calm down, type of a thing. But man, it's both some recognition.
Yeah, just the thing that came to mind as you were talking is that sometimes it's really helpful for us to recognize, okay, and maybe this gets at some other work I've done, but this idea of what do I really need? And how am I trying to get that need met? Because sometimes, especially the pursuers, they're trying to get their needs met in a way that actually pushes their partner away, or that at least decreases the odds that they'll actually be heard. And so it is that idea of trying to say, okay, what's your need? That's really important. And you want the partners to acknowledge that each other's needs are important, but how we're getting those needs, how we're trying to meet those needs sometimes is counterproductive.
Mm-hmm. Well,
there's another concept you studied quite a bit, Ryan, a signal and respond. I'm not as familiar with this. Tell us more about, for couples, what signal and respond means in a relationship.
Yeah, and that's actually what I was starting, just inching into a little bit with what I just said. So let me give you just a quick background. In a lot of attachment research, one of the names you'll sometimes hear about is Mary Ainsworth, and she did a lot of really cool research with mostly mothers and infants, and just watched them and tried to understand. Back in her day, the idea was, I think John Watson said there are serious knocks ahead for the over-pampered child, or and there was this idea that if you respond to someone's crying, that you're reinforcing the cry. That's a behavioral idea. And so she ended up showing that that wasn't the case. And then she developed this laboratory procedure. It's called the strange situation, but the long and the short of it is that there's a separation between the caregiver and the infant. The caregiver leaves the room, is with another person. The child is left with another person. And it's just, there's a little bit of distress that the child feels. Well, they found that it's really important when the caregiver comes back, and they look and see how the child responds when the caregiver comes back. And as you might expect, some of the children cry, they're really upset. Some are distressed, but they're not crying or anything. But when the caregiver comes through the door, they go straight to the caregiver and they put their hands up and they're like, hold me, and that is a signal. So one of the things that I did in my research with couples is I started to look, and it's actually really clear in caregiver-infant relationships. And then I realized, wait a second, I think it can be applied to couples. But you do have some infants that they'll start towards the parent, and then at one moment, they'll kind of veer off because they're not really sure that if they signal clearly that their needs will get met. Or sometimes they're upset, and they're still upset at the caregiver, and they're arching their back, or they're not being comforted by the caregiver. They might go to them. And so all of these are different signals. The last two are less clear, but obviously that putting your hands up and this is what I want, and then you get what you need, that's a clear signal. In couple relationships, sometimes we don't signal clearly what we want. And there's two parts to that, but the goal with that first part is to try and help signal clearly. responsiveness is the other part. And when in the work I've done with parents and children, we try and help the parent know that even if they don't signal crystal clear, that maybe there's a way that they can respond appropriately. But it's kind of this dance of trying to trying to be attuned, and trying to signal clearly and then respond appropriately. And the couples that, that are successful, they have clear signals, and then the other person's attuned enough that they reach out when it's most appropriate. And in fact, what I've found is there's a question that sometimes people will ask. Maybe it's implicit, but will you be there for me when things go right or when things go wrong? Will you be there both? When things are going well, will you be there for me? When I'm struggling, will you be there for me? And so the signaling, responding, I think a lot of the work that I do in therapy is to try and help partners signal appropriately and respond in a loving, sensitive way. When you think parents and children, it's more one-sided. The parent needs to be the responder. The child needs to be the signaler. But in couples, it's both.
Yeah, just that ability to, over the years, I've tried to become better at this, Ryan, with my wife. I'm definitely not perfect. But just to visually see, Matt, she's got a lot, we've got a wedding coming up and a daughter having a baby and all these wedding showers and plans and stuff. And I can sometimes just see like, okay, I need to respond this way, or maybe she needs this, or maybe what can I do for her? So it's more of this, I can see the signal that she's giving off is one often of stress or anxiety, and my ability to, respond or to not pile another stressor on there. So I'm trying to, and sometimes it's visual cues or, even tone of voice or, those sighs that she has. And so I try to see that and respond. But again, it's taken us, years to try to pick up on that, I guess. I'm a slow learner, maybe.
Well, and it's more complex than just me saying, hey, let me know when something comes up. I'm not going to know unless you tell me. I need to be looking. But it is true that it is nice when our partners can clearly let us know, hey, this is what I need. Or what some other research has found is that, if I try and support you in a way, you just mentioned supporting your wife. It's great when she can kind of let you know what she needs, because there's a term called support adequacy, which means, how appropriate is the support that we give. You could try and support her by taking out the trash, when she actually needs a hug or something more emotional, or maybe she does need something kind of tangible, something done. But it's trying to navigate that and figuring out how you can really best show support. Sometimes you can try and figure that out just by being attuned and noticing. And sometimes it's really helpful when she says, hey, this is what I need. I need a hug. Or, take out the trash. Hey, will you go pay these bills? Or, whatever it might be.
Yeah.
We'll be right back after this brief message. And we're back. Well, let's dive right in.
Ryan, can you talk to us a little bit about anger and its role in relationships today? Now, anger is always, it's been around, right, since the beginning of time, but it feels like, our sons, our kids play lacrosse and football and things, and it feels like the tempers and things are rising faster, the triggers and the meanness, the hostility is coming. I can't help it. Some of that is happening inside homes and relationships today. Can you tell us a little bit about, the role of anger and the destructive role that it's playing today?
Well, what's interesting? I think a lot of these sorts of things, it's like, okay, how do we define anger? How do we define, some of the things that are similar to anger? And so one way that I could define this is, anger has a function and a role. It doesn't have to be negative. Contempt, hostility, those are pretty negative. Those are, it's really hard to say that they're ever going to have a role in relationships. One of the terms that's used in attachment language is, if I feel like separation, if I feel like something's not right, I will go into a protest mode. And so you can imagine that pure anger, rather than being hostile, rather than being, contemptuous, it's a signal. It's a signal that, hey, something's not quite right. And it's a protest of, hey, something's not right. We need to fix this. It can like encourage corrective action. It's kind of like, pain. Putting my hand on a stove, that's signals. Wait, something's not right. Get your hand off the stove, right? And so I think anger in relationships does not have to be negative, but it's what we do with it. And very often it does turn negative, because anytime that we try and use our anger to hurt the other emotionally or anything, sometimes that's the thing. I feel hurt. What's the saying? Hurt people, And so then I say things that I don't mean, or, whatever it might be. And so all of those things, that's never good. But if you look at it as, I still care, and that's what we'll reframe in therapy. We try and help them use their anger productively and not push their partner away, but they still care. They still want, it's a form of protest. They want something to be different, and that's good. One of the hardest things to work with in couples is like a burnt out pursuer, someone who has stopped caring. And you see that in relationships. Unfortunately, it's sometimes you see partner one really wants to work on the relationship. Partner two's uninterested. And that happens for years. And finally, partner one's the burnt out pursuer and they're done. And then the partner two really starts amping up and saying, okay, we need to do something about this. And that's a struggle, right? So anger in relationships, I guess the take home is what you do with it. And so, there's a balanced form of anger. There's anger towards self, in like deflated anger. That's no good. That ends up being like shame. And then there's anger toward outward, where I'm trying to hurt you. And that's no good either. It's just this balance of saying, hey, this happened and it's not okay, and we need to deal with it. That's anger, rather than raising the temperature, the voice of, that turns more to hostility or contempt.
Yeah. Okay.
So the protest, I like that word, bringing something up. Yeah. I give up trying to do anger, the conflict in a really healthy way. I didn't give up on that. So it's a very small, narrow window you're talking about, isn't it, Ryan? A healthy expression of that. I like that word.
And it does require us to define it a little differently than what we normally, because usually we say anger and we think that's bad, right? And it can be if we define it in terms of hostility and contempt and those sorts of things.
Mm-hmm. You've published research on attachment, connection, and bonding in relationships. Can you please give us some practical pointers about how couples can bond more fully in their relationships?
Yeah, I think a big thing, and I kind of mentioned this before, but I've really found that we're trying to connect. We're trying to understand how we connect. Sometimes people are wired somewhat differently. So how I like to be connected with might be a little bit different to how my spouse likes to be connected with. That doesn't mean that, saying kind words, if maybe she feels love in a different way than kind words, I'm not saying you don't do that, right? And she should be able to accept that those kind words are meant with love, but it really is trying to figure out how can we connect in the best way possible. And I think it's a two-part process, where one is connecting when things are going well, and being able to do that, but also finding ways to connect even when there's a struggle. and there's two terms. One is conflict, one is social support. Social support is, well, conflict is the partner is the source of my struggle. Social support is, it may be my work, it may be other things that I'm struggling with, but the support and those processes are still the same. And I think attachment theory really has helped me understand, how can we reach out? How can we be there for each other when there's distress, when there's struggle, whether the distress is me or whether it's something else.
Mm-hmm. Man, it's such key. And that's really why we call it Stronger Marriage Connection. The name of our podcast is because how important that bond, that attachment, those little things, those bids, the responses, all that are to relationships. That's really what people want, is the stronger connection in their marriage. Many of them. Ryan, I'm curious as to whether the challenges that couples are dealing with have changed over the past 20 years since you've been practicing with couples. Are there common challenges, right? Or have you seen any upticks in challenges or specific problems that couples come in with? Technology may be one of those, right? That it just wasn't around technoference, those kinds of things. But in your experience in working with the students, working with couples and individuals, have you seen some, again, patterns or something, anything that has really escalated, I guess, in recent years?
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the technology, because that made me think of a few new things. But there are some same culprits that haven't changed, infidelity, affairs, a lot of things related to parenting, although that has changed with technology and different things of how to navigate that. Most couples still will say that a huge piece of why they're coming in is communication. And we always smile at that, because usually there's more than that. That communication is important, but there's more than that. I would say, as I have thought about maybe some nuances that have emerged over the years, I think when it comes to parenting, I think technology is a big one. I think we've had to navigate, and when you mentioned this, it had me think of, we've had to navigate the use of technology in couple relationships, because it's pretty interesting that I've had a number of couples who have conflict over text, and they're big, long texts. And for the most part, I know there's some people decide that maybe doing it over text helps because there's a little bit more distance between, they can think about things, they can process things. However, what I have found is, if you have conflict over text, you hear about what percentage is nonverbal in our communication. I've heard up to 90% is nonverbal, and you lose that when you communicate by text. And so, one of the things that is challenging, and I've experienced it with someone I texted with, and I don't think they were even trying to be, they might have been trying to be a little snarky, but I read it in such a way that it was devastating to me. I don't even think the person ever realized it, because at one point I started to realize, oh, this person's just joking. This is just a fun thing. And I didn't see it that way. And so there's a lot that gets lost with texting. I think more in Utah, one of the things that, especially my students, when I supervise them, what they seem to navigate more and more are mixed faith marriages. So one partner has transitioned, or they have other beliefs, transitioned out of a belief system, or they have other beliefs. And it's been interesting to help the therapists, help the couples navigate that, because there's a lot of meaning that we give to spirituality. And when and we take a lot of that for granted in terms of that matches. And when it stops matching, then couples really struggle with, okay, what do we do now? And there's a full gamut that's run in terms of some couples being able to live with it and thrive with it, and some couples that don't. But I'd say that. And then I think over the last 20 years, I think we've gotten way better at being aware of trauma. And it's more of a common thing that we think about, that we talk about. There's actually different types of trauma. You think of PTSD, that's life-threatening, kind of single event, although it can happen over time too. But then there's some scholars really like the idea of developmental trauma that occurs over time. Maybe it's never a life-threatening thing, but it really causes me to question a lot of things in my life and in my relationship, and so there's a lot of different types of trauma, and trauma can be really disruptive to relationships because it's a feeling of powerlessness. And when you feel powerless, you try and cope by controlling and making sure that you can predict everything. And that can be disruptive in relationships, either feeling powerless or trying to control things. So.
Yeah.
What about our couples who are in their early years of marriage, Brian? Many of our listeners, I don't think it's too unusual to have struggles those first years of marriage. From a therapist's perspective, what tips and advice do you recommend? And at what point should they maybe reach out for help from a therapist?
You know, it's interesting. The more I've thought about this, the more I've recognized that it is the most amazing thing for couples to come and do any work that's needed early and often. I remember seeing a couple, and they were a young couple. I was younger at the time too, but in the end, they were kind of talking and conflicting about the TV and the remote control. And internally, I kind of was like, "Oh, really? This is you're arguing about the remote?" And yet, the more I thought about it, the more I realized I was so glad that they were there, because there were patterns that we were able to work. They still cared about each other. They loved each other very much, but they were having these issues that emerged about seemingly small things. And we were able to work through the patterns and the cycles that they were enacting with relatively small issues, and they still cared about each other. The thing that's the hardest thing is when couples have let things fester and for 10, 20 years, and then they try and work on it. And by then, that reservoir of like caring and that love, it doesn't feel the same. And sometimes, unfortunately, couples start to rewrite history, and you almost listen to them and they're not sure they ever liked each other. And so I think it is the most amazing thing, and for young couples to say something's not quite right. Let's just go in and get it taken care of, because it makes it so much easier down the road.
So early and often, you said, right?
Yeah.
Early and often. That's great advice.
Yeah. Amen. Hey, Ryan, I mentioned at the beginning of our discussion that I'd bring up this question again. If you had to pick one, I know there's all kinds of keys to a strong marriage, but if you had to pick one, what's your go-to for a stronger marriage connection?
Oh, that's a great question. I think, in addition to all the things I've said, I mean, I think it's really important that we give ourselves some grace or some flexibility, and we recognize, again, there's not one size fits all. I think we see so-and-so's marriage and we think, oh, they clearly have it all together. They have it all figured out. And what's wrong with me? What's wrong with my partner? And so I think a big one is being able to give all of ourselves permission to maybe not get it 100% right, and to recognize, hey, let's work on this. Let's figure this out. And one of the things I've recognized is, I grew up in a very loving home. My parents loved me, and yet they were far from perfect. And I didn't necessarily see the best model of how you handle conflict and challenges and things like that. And as one example, this is more parent-child, but my dad was a farmer, and there's a certain way you communicate on the farm, and it's mostly what you were talking about, elevated voices, things of that nature, maybe some choice words. And I realized with my kids growing up that I got into lecture mode really easily. And because that's what worked growing up. And so I think sometimes it's just being able to identify what models did I have? What do I do, especially under high stress? What do I resort to? What works for me? What's good? And then what do I need to set aside? And so with my kids, it was really trying hard when I felt that to say, okay, what would teaching look like rather than what would lecturing look like? Because they're not the same thing. And so I guess that's one thing that I've learned over time with my therapy and with my life, just give ourselves grace and then also try and look and say, what do I want to keep? What do I want to take? What do I want to learn? And to recognize that we're constantly learning and evolving.
Right. I'm got to say this. I'm so glad that you said that. And I don't know if anyone, Liz, has ever said that, because my mind goes back to couples and even these. I remember at these early years, I might lose it or she might lose it. And we might say something and then, the tone's not helpful. And then we apologize. And then you know what? The next day or the next week, we do it again. And, the tone goes up. I'm like, man, I apologize, but I did it again. And so I think you're exactly right that we shouldn't expect this perfection, that we're growing together, give ourselves grace, forgiveness, even of ourselves. And at the time, I really am sorry. She really is sorry. And then, man, tempers get going again or whatever. And we say and do things. And so I think couples can get talking about patterns, because patterns are really kicking themselves and being like, man, I keep apologizing, or my spouse keeps apologizing. Man, they keep losing it. So anyway, I think that's more profound than I, at least as it comes across at first for me. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, you bet. And, as a therapist, I would reframe that too. What you just said is, see, you're still trying. Yeah, it's not going as you want it to, but I'm so glad you're still trying. Because again, that's when couples really struggle, is when they get to that point where they don't feel like trying anymore.
Of apathy, right? That is frightening. You're right. Well, Dr. Ryan Seedall, please tell us, where can our listeners find out more about you, the counseling center there at USU, and any other helpful resources you'd like to share, please?
Yeah, so like what was said before, I'm the program director at the Marriage and Family Therapy program at Utah State. So you can find me on the Human Development Family Studies website there, and the Marriage and Family Therapy website. I've got a small private practice in North Logan called the Center for Couples and Families, Cache Valley. And then, our students are amazing and they do great work. And it's the Sorensen Center for Clinical Excellence, the behavioral health clinic. It has psychology and marriage and family therapy. And so I'm kind of in all those places. So.
Yeah. Awesome. Thanks, Ryan. For our listeners, we'll be sure to put links in the show notes, direct links to the websites where you can find out more about Ryan and the center and the services that are and resources offered there. Hey, before we let you go, we like to end with a takeaway of the day. Ryan, is there a take-home message, right? If you could give a shout out, so a principle, a tip for couples, emphasize a principle, what would it be?
I think, I've used that word, but attunement. I think if everyone really tries to attune and really notice what's going on for their partner, I think the world would be way different if we were better attuned to one another. Our society is such where, we're primed to say, how you doing, Dave? How you doing, Liz? And you're supposed to tell me fine or good or whatever. And I'm not talking about in casual conversation, but it's just really important to be really attuned and to recognize, Dave, how are you really doing? Liz, how are you really doing? And to be able to talk about that. And I think what I've found, I can't remember what happened the other day, but someone was super vulnerable. And it just really led to a lot more closeness and a positive thing. And so I think that attunement and being able to attune to someone's vulnerability, it just brings closeness a lot more. And sometimes we put walls up and we don't want to show that, but that's how we gain closeness in our relationships, in our marriages, and in a lot of what we do. So
yeah, and that takes risk, right? It takes, I'm going to open up, and if I get burned, and I may close up and not risk again and be vulnerable, but man, that vulnerability, when it is reciprocated, shared, responsive, amen, that is key.
And the hope is if you open up and I'm attuned, I won't miss it. And that will be different, because that's the big thing is, why would I open up if you're not going to respond? Because it does happen. Something's like, oh, well, it's been a rough day. Oh, well, that's too bad. We'll see you later, and so it's trying to do both.
Yeah. Love it. Liz, what about you? What's your takeaway of the day with Dr. Ryan Seedall?
I am touched by the signal and respond. That whole question, will you be there for me? That's what we really want to know. It reminds me of Dr. Sue Johnson's work a little bit, Ryan, right? Are you there for me? Accessible, responsive, engaged. I love that. I think my husband's actually better at it than I am. Thank you for the reminder. Dave, what's a rich nugget for you, my friend, and with our time together with Dr. Ryan?
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. All kinds of great insights. For me, it's the patterns, to pause and look at patterns. And it takes kind of stepping out because when you're in the pattern and in the cycle, it's really tough to see yourself in it. So it does take a little bit of a pause perspective in this pattern, looking to see, okay, man, we keep doing this. How do we get out of this? What's my part in this? What is it that I really need? What are they, what do they need? And then I'm going to just say it again for couples. If you feel like you're stuck and in this pattern, you need help getting out, reach out to, for help. Therapists, counselors can be so very, helpful. Just another person to kind of help you both see and improve your relationship. So I hope that you don't hesitate, but that you reach out for help when you feel like you need it. Ryan, thanks again, my friend, for coming on, and sure appreciate your wisdom and your time today.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
All right, friends, that does it for us. We will see you again next time on another episode of the Stronger Marriage Connection podcast.
Then I just have to say, Utah State is lucky to have you both, Dr. Seedall and Dr. Schramm. Good for you. And remember, dear friends and family, it's the small things that create a stronger marriage connection. Take care now.
Thanks for joining us today. Hey, do us a favor and take a second to subscribe to our podcast and the Utah Marriage Commission YouTube channel at Utah Marriage Commission, where you can watch this and every episode of the show. Be sure to smash the like button, leave a comment, and share this episode with a friend. You can also follow and interact with us on Instagram at Stronger Marriage Life and Facebook at Stronger Marriage. So be sure to share with us which topics you loved or which guests we should have on the show next. If you want even more resources to improve your marriage or relationship connection, visit strongermarriage.org, where you'll find free workshops, e-courses, in-depth webinars, relationship surveys, and more. Each episode of Stronger Marriage Connection is hosted and sponsored by the Utah Marriage Commission at Utah State University. And finally, a big thanks to our producer, Rex Polanis, and the team at Utah State University, and you, our audience. You make this show possible. The opinions, findings, conclusions, and recommendations expressed in this podcast do not necessarily reflect the views of the Utah Marriage Commission.